The girl walked quietly through the crowded school auditorium, her small backpack hanging loosely over her shoulder. She kept her eyes on the floor, hoping no one would notice her. But in a room full of students, someone always notices, and today, it felt like everyone was looking. The moment she stepped in, whispers started spreading across the rows of chairs. "Look at her," someone said, a little too loud, and it made her stomach twist. She had felt this before countless times, but that didn't make it any easier. She moved toward the stage where the old grand piano sat under the bright lights. The polished wood gleamed, but it looked intimidating to her. Her hands itched to touch the keys, but she hesitated. The whispers didn't stop. Some students laughed, pointing at the holes in her worn-out shoes or the faded patches on her shirt. She knew they didn't mean to be cruel, but it hurt anyway. Every laugh felt like it was aimed right at her heart. She had always been quiet, preferring the company of books and music to friends who didn't really understand her. Her teachers, too, seemed to have already decided what she was capable of, or rather, what they thought she wasn't capable of. They smiled politely as she walked past them, but she could feel the doubt in their eyes. They assumed she wasn't skilled enough, that she wouldn't make much of an impression. That assumption stung more than the students' whispers because she knew it was wrong. But still, she held her head a little lower and walked on, refusing to let it show that she felt small. She reached the piano and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment and thought about all the times she had been here before, alone in her room, practicing late at night when the house was quiet. No one else had ever heard her play, and somehow that made it both lonely and special. The piano had been her friend, the one place she could pour out everything she felt without judgment. Now it would be different. Now everyone was watching, waiting for her to fail or succeed. A few students snickered as if they were already convinced she would fail. One boy in the front row leaned over to his friend and whispered something that made them both laugh. She felt a pang of fear, but it was mixed with determination. She reminded herself that all those nights alone had been for this moment. Every mistake, every practice session, every late night learning a difficult piece, it had all been preparing her for this. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusted her posture, and took another deep breath. The stage lights were warm on her face, and for a moment she imagined herself in the middle of a small bubble, where nothing else existed but her and the piano. The whispers faded slightly in her mind as she tried to focus. She glanced at the sheet music in front of her, the pages slightly worn and dog-eared from countless practices. She remembered the first time she had opened this book. She had been overwhelmed, thinking the pieces were too hard, but something in her had whispered that she could do it. That voice had never been wrong before. Her fingers touched the keys lightly, almost hesitantly. The first note rang out, soft and fragile. It didn't fill the room yet, but it was a start. Another note followed, slightly stronger this time. She felt a little of the tension in her chest begin to ease. The music was starting to flow slowly, like a small stream finding its path through rocks. And then, just as she began to settle, she heard it. A loud, mocking laugh from somewhere in the middle of the auditorium. She froze for a moment, her finger still on a key. It was hard not to let the fear take over. She could feel her face heat up, and a cold knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. But then she remembered something her father, or maybe it had been an old piano teacher long ago, once told her. The piano doesn't care what anyone thinks. It only listens to the truth in your hands. She repeated that in her mind like a mantra. The music didn't belong to the audience. It belonged to her. Slowly, she pressed another key, then another, letting the notes come out carefully. They were timid at first, hesitant, unsure. But she played each note with intention, imagining the story behind each sound. She thought of the quiet nights she had spent practicing, the hours she had spent learning to control her fingers, her timing, the weight of each note. The more she focused on the music, the less she noticed the whispers and laughter. It still hurt, yes, but it was no longer controlling her. A few students in the back were still giggling, but something had shifted. The sound of the piano had grown stronger, more confident. She had begun to play a simple melody, but it carried a weight, a presence that made people pause. Some students leaned forward, curious now instead of mocking. Even the teachers who had seemed so sure she would fail were watching more intently. They could feel that this girl, quiet, small, easily overlooked, was capable of something unexpected. Her mind started to quiet down, and her fingers moved more freely across the keys. She remembered the first time she had tried to play in front of her older sibling. She had been terrified then too, and her hands had trembled the same way. But when the music started to fill the room, everything changed. The music spoke for her, and for the first time she felt a little invincible. She could feel it happening again now. This same sensation of being carried by something bigger than herself. Something beyond the fear and whispers. As she played, her breathing evened out. The notes became smoother, flowing like water. The melody she had practiced for so long, the one she thought she would never play perfectly, was starting to take shape. And with each note, the auditorium seemed to change. The mocking laughter faded, replaced by a quiet murmur of attention. Eyes that had been rolling in disbelief now widened in surprise. Some students were leaning forward, captivated. A few teachers whispered to each other, impressed by what they were hearing. She couldn't see them all, of course. She could only focus on the piano, on the keys, and on the music flowing from her heart through her hands. She felt a little thrill, realizing that she was starting to control the room with sound, not with words. She didn't need to shout or argue to be noticed. The music spoke for her, and it felt incredible. A few minutes in, she glanced up and realized that even some of the students who had laughed were no longer laughing. They were staring at her, uncertain, caught in the spell of the melody. Her confidence grew a little just from noticing that. Every time she pressed a key, she felt more in control, more like herself. She could see now that the whispers weren't going to stop her. They never could. The music gave her strength. By the time she finished the first part of her piece, there was a moment of silence. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It was as if the whole auditorium had been holding its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. She could feel the tension in her shoulders relax slightly. That first part was done. She had survived the mockery. She had played despite it, and she had felt something she had never felt before: power. Not the power of control over anyone else, but the power of believing in herself even when no one else did. As she sat there, catching her breath, she realized something important. It wasn't just about this performance. It was about every time she had doubted herself, every time she had been laughed at or ignored. All of that had led to this moment. All of it had built her skill, her determination, her love for music. And now, for the first time, she could see that perhaps she was stronger than she had ever imagined. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, but she didn't move yet. She took another deep breath and looked around the auditorium. She could see the change in the faces of her classmates, even if some didn't want to admit it. She could feel the surprise and respect from the teachers, and somewhere deep inside she knew this was just the beginning. The piano was not just an instrument, it was a way to speak, a way to prove something that words could never express. And though she was still nervous, she smiled a little to herself. She had taken the first step. She had faced the mockery, and she had played anyway. And that, she realized, was already something extraordinary. After the first notes had filled the room, a strange kind of silence settled over the auditorium. It was not the awkward silence of uncertainty, nor the empty quiet of boredom. It was a silence that held attention, that waited for the next sound to break it. The girl's hands rested lightly on the piano keys, her fingers still trembling just a little. She could feel her heart beating fast, but it was different from the fear before. This time, it was the thrill of possibility, a mixture of excitement and determination that made her alert in every nerve and every muscle. She glanced at the sheet music in front of her. It was a piece she had practiced countless times, a difficult melody she had once thought was impossible. Her eyes ran over the notes, and her fingers itched to move again. The first part had been cautious, careful. Now she could let herself go a little more. She thought about the music not as a challenge, but as a story she wanted to tell. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence. She wanted to share something she had carried inside for so long. The room seemed larger now, but somehow the space around the piano felt like her own little world. She focused on the keys, imagining that the audience, with their whispers and doubts, did not exist. For a moment, it was just her and the music. The first few notes of the next section trembled out into the quiet room. They were softer at first, tentative, but they carried a subtle emotion that tugged at the hearts of those listening. From somewhere in the back, she noticed a few students leaning forward. They had been laughing moments ago, but now their expressions were curious, almost hesitant. Even the teachers were watching more closely, some exchanging quiet murmurs as they observed her fingers moving across the keys. She could feel the shift, though she didn't allow it to distract her. The music was more important than approval. It was more important than recognition. It was important because it was hers. As the melody continued, her confidence grew. Her fingers moved faster, yet they were precise, almost as if they had a mind of their own. Each chord seemed to speak directly to the hearts of the listeners. She felt herself slipping into a rhythm, a flow that she had only ever experienced during her late-night practice sessions alone. The notes came naturally now, almost like breathing. She could feel the music inside her, rising from her chest and pouring through her hands into the piano. She remembered the nights she had spent practicing this piece, sitting in her small room with the window slightly open, letting the sounds of the piano fill the quiet house. No one had been there to watch or judge. She had made mistakes, countless mistakes, but she had never stopped. She had returned again and again, determined to master every chord, every subtle shift in tempo. Those nights had been lonely, but they had also been powerful. They had built her strength, her patience, and her skill. Now, in front of the entire school, all of that practice began to show. The timid girl who had walked onto the stage only moments ago was no longer timid. Her posture was straighter, her movements deliberate and graceful. She could feel the attention in the room, the way it had shifted from doubt to fascination. The mocking laughter that had seemed so heavy earlier had disappeared. It was replaced by something else, an unspoken acknowledgement of her talent. She reached a section of the music that was faster, more challenging, with chords that demanded both speed and accuracy. Her fingers danced over the keys, almost as if they were separate from her body, moving in perfect rhythm. She felt a thrill, a rush of adrenaline that was stronger than any fear she had felt earlier. The audience seemed to lean in collectively, drawn by the energy she was pouring into the piece. Even the students who had snickered were now silent, captivated by the sound. Her eyes flicked briefly to the audience. She saw some students with wide eyes unable to look away. A few teachers had their arms crossed, but their expressions had softened, a mixture of surprise and admiration. She noticed one student at the back biting their lip, trying not to show the awe they felt. These small details made her smile slightly, though she didn't stop playing. The music had to continue. The story had to be told. The melody shifted again, slower this time, more emotional. She played with a tenderness that surprised even herself. She thought about her life, the times she had felt alone, the moments she had been ignored or mocked. Each of those memories was now reflected in her music, a gentle sadness that carried weight and beauty. The notes resonated through the auditorium, filling every corner, touching the hearts of everyone present. She noticed subtle reactions from the audience. A student wiped a small tear from their eye. Another leaned back, their eyes wide as if they could hardly believe what they were hearing. Even the teachers exchanged glances, acknowledging silently that this girl, so easily dismissed before, was capable of something extraordinary. She had become more than just a student. She had become a storyteller, sharing a part of her soul through the piano. As she moved to the climax of the piece, her hands moved faster, more confidently. The music swelled, filling the room with a powerful emotional wave. She could feel the energy in the room shift, the audience now completely immersed in her performance. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were expressions of everything she had ever felt: fear, hope, determination, and a quiet strength that refused to be broken. She thought back to the moments when she had been laughed at in the hallways, the times she had been ignored or overlooked. She remembered the whispers and snickers from students who assumed she wasn't capable. And now here she was, pouring every ounce of skill, emotion, and courage into the music. She realized that all of those moments had led to this. They had shaped her, forced her to persevere, and made this performance possible. The final notes approached, and she could feel her heart pounding, not with fear, but with exhilaration. She played with precision, her fingers striking each key with a mix of power and grace. The melody rose and fell, carried by her confidence and skill. She felt a sense of triumph, not over anyone else, but over her own doubts and fears. She had faced the mockery, and she was still standing. She had played beautifully, and in that moment she felt unstoppable. As the last note lingered in the air, there was a brief pause. No one moved. The room held its breath for just a second, as if not wanting to break the magic that had been created. Then slowly the audience began to react. Whispers of amazement spread first, quiet and tentative. Some students exchanged astonished glances. Others smiled, unable to hide their admiration. A few teachers even stood, clapping softly at first. Then more confidently as the applause grew louder. The girl sat there, hands still hovering above the keys, a mixture of relief and exhilaration washing over her. She had done it. She had played despite the fear, despite the whispers, despite the mocking laughter. She had created something beautiful, something that touched people, and for the first time in a long while she felt truly seen. Not for her clothes, not for her quiet nature, but for her talent, her courage, and her heart. The applause grew louder, filling the auditorium with a sound that was both exhilarating and comforting. She finally allowed herself to smile, a small, shy smile, but one that carried all the joy and pride she had been holding inside. She had discovered something powerful today, that the music was her voice, stronger than words, stronger than judgment, and stronger than fear. As she rose from the piano bench, the room continued to applaud. Some students approached her shyly at first, offering words of praise. Others simply nodded, unable to find the words to express their awe. Even the teachers who had once doubted her came forward, congratulating her warmly, their expressions filled with genuine admiration. She could hardly believe it, but she realized that the music had done more than just fill the room. It had changed the way people saw her. She stepped off the stage, her heart still racing, but now with a sense of accomplishment that made every anxious moment worth it. The girl who had walked in timid and unsure moments ago had faced the mockery, faced the whispers, and emerged stronger. She had discovered that her talent was more than just a skill. It was a way to express herself, to connect with others, and to prove to herself that she could overcome fear and doubt. As she left the auditorium, she felt a quiet determination growing inside her. This was only the beginning. She knew there would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and perhaps even more people who would underestimate her, but now she had tasted the power of her own courage and skill. She had seen the effect her music could have on people, how it could move them and change the way they thought, and she knew she would continue to play, to practice, to grow, and to share her music with the world. In that moment, the girl understood something she had never fully realized before. The piano was more than an instrument. It was her voice, her refuge, and her bridge to others, and no amount of mocking or doubt could ever take that away from her. After the applause had died down, the girl stayed near the piano for a moment, letting the silence of the room sink in. It was different now. The auditorium felt alive in a new way, as if her music had left a mark that no one could ignore. Some students still whispered, but these whispers were no longer mocking. They carried curiosity, surprise, and even admiration. She could feel it in the air, a shift that made her chest swell with cautious pride. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, almost absent-mindedly, enjoying the sensation. Each key felt familiar, yet now they seemed to respond differently, almost like they understood her better than anyone in the audience had ever tried to. She thought about all the times she had practiced alone in her room, how she had learned to listen carefully to every note, every subtle change in sound. Those late-night practices, once lonely and quiet, now seemed like the secret foundation of the power she felt at this moment. The girl noticed a few students approaching her hesitantly. One of them, a boy who had laughed earlier, stepped forward with a hesitant smile. I didn't expect that," he said quietly, avoiding eye contact. She simply nodded, letting her hands rest on the piano. She didn't need to say anything. The music had already spoken, and it had said more than words ever could. He left with a shy nod, and she smiled slightly. Realizing that the first step toward respect had been taken, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes, letting her memory drift to the first time she had really felt music in her soul. She had been very young, maybe 8 or 9, when she first discovered that the piano was more than an instrument. It was a place where she could express feelings she didn't yet understand. Joy, sadness, frustration, hope, all of it flowed through her fingers, spilling out onto the keys in a language only music could speak. That feeling had never left her, even through the teasing and doubt, and now it guided her hands with a quiet certainty. The next section of the piece was more complex, filled with fast arpeggios and intricate chords. She placed her fingers carefully on the keys, taking a moment to feel the rhythm in her body. The audience watched as her hands began to move with precision and speed, the notes coming alive in a way that was almost magical. It wasn't just skill. It was the depth of emotion she poured into every keystroke. Her music now commanded attention, not just from the audience but from herself. She felt a connection, almost like the piano and she were moving as one. A few students who had been talking quietly in the back suddenly stopped. Their faces showed astonishment, their mouths slightly open. Even those who had doubted her now leaned forward, unable to look away. One teacher whispered to another, shaking their heads slightly in disbelief. "I never thought she could play like this," they murmured. The girl could feel the weight of all those doubts melting away, replaced by something stronger. The recognition that she was not just playing, she was performing. Her heart pounded, but it was no longer from fear. It was from excitement, from the thrill of seeing her hard work come to life in front of others. She remembered all the nights when she had stayed up late, practicing until her fingers ached when no one had been there to witness her effort. Those nights had seemed lonely, but now they had built a foundation strong enough to carry her through this moment. She realized that every tear, every frustration, every whispered insult from classmates had led her to this. As the music swelled, she let herself get lost in it completely. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, gliding over the keys with a fluidity that seemed almost effortless. The complex chords she had once feared now felt natural, like an extension of her own body. She could feel the emotion in every note, the sadness, the hope, the longing, all blending together into a sound that seemed to resonate in the very walls of the auditorium. She noticed something remarkable. The audience was completely silent. No one breathed too loudly. No one shifted in their seat. They were captivated, hanging on every note, every pause, every subtle shift in the melody. Even the students who had been the harshest critics were now listening with wide eyes, their expressions filled with awe and disbelief. She realized that she had their full attention, not by shouting or demanding it, but simply by playing with honesty and courage. The girl's mind drifted for a moment to her family. She thought about her parents and the sacrifices they had made for her, even if they didn't fully understand her talent. She remembered the pride in their eyes when she played at home, the small moments of encouragement that had kept her going. Those memories filled her with warmth, and she felt a deeper connection to the music. Each note now carried a piece of her gratitude, her love, and her story. She reached a particularly difficult part of the piece, one she had struggled with for weeks. Her fingers flew across the keys, hitting each note with clarity and strength. The rhythm was complex, almost chaotic, but she had practiced it so many times that it had become second nature. She felt a surge of confidence as she realized she was not just playing the notes. She was expressing something deeper, something that went beyond technique. This was the part where the music spoke not just to the ears but to the heart. The audience reacted subtly but noticeably. Some students leaned forward, caught in the beauty of the sound. Others closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Teachers exchanged glances, impressed not only by her technical skill but by the emotion she conveyed. The girl felt a quiet pride, but she did not let it distract her. She knew that the music still had more to say, and she was determined to tell the whole story. As the piece moved toward its crescendo, her hands moved faster, yet every note was precise. She felt a thrill, a rush of adrenaline that made her heart beat in time with the music. The sound of the piano filled the room, powerful and commanding, yet filled with a delicate beauty that held everyone's attention. She had become fully immersed in the performance, and for the first time, she truly understood the magic of sharing music with others. She noticed a few students whispering to each other, pointing at her hands in disbelief. "I didn't know she could play like that," one of them said softly. Another nodded, unable to speak. Even the teachers who had once doubted her were now watching with admiration, recognizing that she had talent far beyond what they had imagined. The girl did not stop to think about the praise. She simply continued to play, letting the music flow naturally from her heart. Every note now carried emotion. Every chord told a story. She felt a connection to each person in the room, even those who had once mocked her. The music had become a bridge, linking her experience to theirs, communicating feelings that words could not capture. She realized that this was the true power of her talent. Not just skill or technique, but the ability to move others, to make them feel something real and deep. Her mind drifted briefly to the first day she had learned this piece. She had been frustrated, thinking she would never master it. She had stumbled over the notes, hitting wrong keys, feeling embarrassed and discouraged. But she had persisted, practicing again and again, refusing to give up. And now here she was, playing it flawlessly in front of a room full of people, transforming her own struggles into something beautiful. The music began to slow, transitioning into a softer, more reflective section. She allowed herself to linger on the keys, letting each note resonate fully. This part of the piece carried a gentle sadness, a quiet emotion that touched the listeners in a new way. She could feel the effect it had on the audience. Some students' eyes were glistening with tears, and a few teachers placed a hand over their heart, moved by the depth of feeling in her performance. She realized something profound in that moment. Music had the power to transform not just the player, but the listeners as well. It could change their perception, their emotions, even their respect for someone they had once doubted. She had experienced mockery and disbelief, but through her courage and skill, she had turned those moments into an opportunity to connect and inspire. The crescendo approached again, stronger this time. Her hands moved with confidence, striking each note with purpose and emotion. The audience could feel the intensity, the passion, the raw honesty in her performance. The girl felt a sense of triumph, not over anyone else, but over her own fear and self-doubt. She had taken control of the stage, of the music, and of her story. As the final notes lingered in the air, a hush fell over the room. The audience waited, almost afraid to break the spell that had been created. And then slowly, applause began. It started softly, hesitantly, but grew louder and stronger with each passing second. Students clapped, some standing, their faces filled with awe. Teachers joined in, their expressions warm and proud. The girl felt a wave of relief and joy wash over her. She had done it. She had played with courage, skill, and heart, and the audience had recognized it. She stood up from the piano bench, her body trembling slightly from the effort, but her face glowing with pride. She had faced fear, ridicule, and doubt and emerged victorious. The music had given her strength, and now it had given her recognition and respect. She knew this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead, but she also knew that she was ready. The girl who had once been mocked had found her voice, and it was stronger than anyone could have imagined. The applause continued to echo through the auditorium, filling the space with a warmth that seemed to surround the girl like a gentle hug. She stayed by the piano for a moment, letting her chest rise and fall as she absorbed the energy of the room. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. Just minutes ago, she had felt small, nervous, and unsure. Now she felt seen, respected, and most importantly, powerful. The music had spoken for her in ways words never could. Students slowly started to approach her, one by one, their faces a mixture of awe and admiration. Some still looked nervous, as if they weren't quite sure it was really happening. One student, who had been laughing with friends before, now stood frozen in front of her, eyes wide. "That was incredible," they said quietly, almost in disbelief. She gave a small, shy nod, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. She didn't need to boast. The music had already done the talking. Others followed, hesitant at first, but gradually gaining confidence. "I didn't think anyone could play like that," a girl whispered, her voice soft but sincere. The girl smiled gently, recognizing the honesty in the comment. It was strange, this shift in attention. Just moments ago, these same people had mocked her, whispering and pointing. Now they were leaning forward, watching her with genuine curiosity and respect. She realized how fragile assumptions could be, and how quickly they could be overturned by courage and skill. Even the teachers, who had initially doubted her, were visibly impressed. A couple of them exchanged quiet words, nodding and smiling. One teacher walked toward her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You have a rare gift," they said, their voice filled with admiration. "That was extraordinary. Keep practicing, keep performing. You have something very special." The girl's heart skipped a beat. Praise from her teachers had always felt out of reach, and now it was being offered freely. She felt seen in a way that went beyond the music itself. As the audience began to disperse slightly, a few students lingered near the stage, still unable to let go of what they had just witnessed. They spoke in hushed tones, pointing at her fingers, the way she had moved with such precision and emotion. "I can't believe she's been here all this time and no one noticed," one of them said. Another nodded, shaking their head slowly. "It's like we've been blind this whole time." The girl listened quietly, a warm sense of validation spreading through her. She had always known her talent was there, even when others didn't. Now it was impossible for anyone to deny it. She walked away from the piano, her steps light, almost floating. For a brief moment, she looked around the auditorium, taking in the faces of those who had witnessed her performance. Some were smiling, some were still wide-eyed, and a few were even wiping tears from their eyes. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. She felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had shared something deeply personal through her music, and it had been received with genuine emotion. That was more than she had ever hoped for. In the days that followed, the impact of her performance became more evident. Students who had once ignored her now approached her with quiet respect. They asked questions about the pieces she had played, about how long she had been practicing and what inspired her. Each conversation was a reminder that the music had broken barriers, opening doors that had once seemed firmly closed. The girl felt a new sense of belonging, not because she had changed who she was, but because others had begun to recognize her for what she had always been, talented, determined, and fearless in her pursuit of passion. Her teachers began to notice the shift as well. In music class, they encouraged her to explore more challenging pieces, giving her opportunities to perform in small recitals and local competitions. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Performing in front of the entire school had been one thing, but performing in new venues in front of strangers brought a different kind of pressure. Still, she welcomed it. She had tasted the thrill of success and the power of her own courage, and she knew she wanted more. Her parents, who had supported her quietly all these years, were proud beyond words. They listened to her play at home, offering smiles, gentle encouragement, and sometimes tears of pride. They had known she was talented, had always known it, but seeing the world begin to recognize it too was something entirely new. They reminded her softly that talent was only part of the journey. Dedication, perseverance, and a willingness to take risks were just as important. She nodded, understanding now more than ever the truth of their words. The girl found herself thinking back to the first day she had walked onto that stage, uncertain, nervous, and afraid of being laughed at. The memory of whispers, snickers, and mocking glances seemed almost surreal now. She realized how far she had come, not just in skill but in confidence. That shy, uncertain girl had grown into someone who could face an audience, channel her emotions into music, and command attention with nothing but her talent and courage. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life, that belief in oneself could overcome fear, doubt, and even ridicule. As she continued to practice in the days following her performance, she noticed a subtle but important change in herself. She played not just for perfection, but for expression. Each note became a conversation with the world, a way to tell her story without words. She felt freer, more alive, and more connected to her own heart than ever before. The music had become a language of its own, one that others could feel and understand without explanation. Her peers began to treat her differently too. Some students who had once avoided her or whispered behind her back now approached with curiosity, seeking advice on piano techniques or asking to hear her play. Others simply offered quiet acknowledgement, a nod or a smile that conveyed newfound respect. She noticed that respect could be earned not through confrontation, but through courage, patience, and the quiet confidence to pursue one's passion relentlessly. In school hallways, the whispers had changed tone. Instead of mocking comments, she began to hear words of admiration. Some students even shared her story with others, describing the way she had played, the emotion in her performance, and the way she had silenced doubt with her talent. She realized how powerful an impression could be, how a single moment of courage could ripple outward, affecting people she might never meet. It was a humbling but exhilarating realization. She continued to perform in front of small groups at first, then gradually in larger gatherings. Each time the nervousness returned, but it was different now. The fear was no longer paralyzing. It was energizing, a reminder that something important was at stake. With each performance, she grew stronger, more confident, and more connected to her own music. She discovered that the more she gave of herself, the more the audience responded, not just to her skill, but to her authenticity. One day, after a school recital, a local music teacher approached her. They had heard about her performance from others and wanted to meet the girl who had captivated an entire auditorium. "Your talent is extraordinary," the teacher said warmly. "You have a gift that should be nurtured. With the right guidance, you could go very far." The girl felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. The idea of being guided, of learning from someone with more experience, was thrilling but also a little intimidating. Yet she felt ready. She had faced fear before, and this was simply the next step in her journey. As she left school that day, walking through the quiet streets with the evening sun casting long shadows, she reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the journey from fear to confidence, from mockery to admiration. She thought about the nights of practice, the moments of doubt, and the courage it had taken to step onto the stage, and she realized that all of it had been necessary. Without the challenges, without the whispers and snickers, she might never have discovered the full extent of her own strength. The girl knew that her journey was just beginning. There would be more performances, more challenges, and perhaps more moments of doubt, but now she carried with her the knowledge that she could overcome anything with persistence, passion, and courage. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. It was the willingness to take risks, to face fear, and to express oneself fully that made the difference. And as she prepared for her next performance, she felt a quiet determination building inside her. She would continue to practice, to push herself, and to explore the depths of her music. She knew that there were still pieces she had yet to master, emotions she had yet to express, and audiences she had yet to move. But she also knew that she had already achieved something extraordinary. She had found her voice, silenced doubt, and shown the world what she was capable of. That evening, as she sat by the piano at home, she let her fingers glide over the keys, feeling the familiar connection between herself and the instrument. The room was quiet, but in her mind she could still hear the echoes of the applause, the awe in the faces of her classmates, and the respect in the eyes of her teachers. She smiled, understanding that this was more than just music. It was a journey, a story, and a proof of what could happen when courage and passion meet. The girl's story was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. But she had already learned lessons that would stay with her forever. That talent deserved to be shared. That the weeks after her remarkable performance passed in a blur of excitement, practice, and small victories. The girl had become a quiet sensation at school. Students who had once ignored her or whispered behind her back now watched her with a mixture of awe and respect. It was strange to be treated differently, and at times it felt almost surreal. She still remained the same shy, thoughtful person she had always been. But now people were finally noticing the depth of her talent. The shift in attention was both humbling and encouraging. Her days were filled with music. She practiced every morning before school, sneaking in extra hours whenever she could. The piano had become more than just an instrument. It was a part of her life, a companion that understood her in ways that no one else could. Every piece she played seemed to carry a part of her soul, and she began to explore music in new ways, experimenting with tempo, dynamics, and emotion. She realized that technical skill was important, but what truly touched people was the feeling behind each note. One afternoon, as she played in the school music room, a teacher she had never spoken to before entered quietly. The teacher listened for several minutes, nodding slowly as the music filled the room. When the piece ended, the teacher smiled warmly and said, "You have something very rare. You play not just with skill, but with heart. You should consider performing outside the school. There are opportunities you may not even know exist." The girl felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Performing in front of strangers was a completely different challenge. Yet the idea sparked a thrill inside her. Not long after, she received her first invitation to perform at a small local music event. It wasn't a big stage or a famous venue, but it was something new, something that could take her talent beyond the walls of her school. She spent days preparing, practicing every note until it was flawless, while also reminding herself to let the music flow naturally, to play with emotion and honesty rather than just precision. Her parents encouraged her, proud and excited to see her stepping into a world she had always dreamed of. The day of the event arrived, and the girl felt a familiar nervous flutter in her stomach. She had faced the school auditorium and overcome mockery, but this was different. Here, she didn't know the audience. They didn't know her story. They didn't know her struggles, her nights of practice, or her quiet determination. She walked to the stage, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the piano keys. The lights were bright, the room larger than she expected, but she tried to block everything else out. She focused on the music, on the melody she wanted to share, and on the story she wanted to tell. The first notes were soft, almost fragile, but they carried a power she could feel. The audience leaned forward slightly, curious and attentive. She moved into the piece more confidently, allowing herself to become fully absorbed in the music. Her fingers moved with fluidity, the notes flowing effortlessly. She could feel the energy in the room, the quiet anticipation, and she let it fuel her performance. This was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about sharing something real, something meaningful, something that had lived inside her for years. As the performance continued, she noticed subtle reactions from the audience. A few people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned in, captivated by the emotion in each chord. She could hear soft murmurs of admiration from the back of the room. These were strangers, people who didn't know her, yet her music had managed to reach them in a way that words never could. She realized that her ability to connect through music was no longer limited to her school. It could extend further, touching lives she had never imagined. When the final notes lingered in the air, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then applause erupted, genuine and enthusiastic. The girl felt a rush of relief and pride. She had faced new fear, a new kind of challenge, and she had succeeded. She stood, bowed slightly, and allowed herself a small, shy smile. This performance was different from her first. It was no longer about overcoming ridicule. It was about sharing her gift with the world and seeing that it could move people, inspire them, and make them feel. After the event, she was approached by a local music teacher who had been in the audience. "You have incredible talent," the teacher said warmly. "I can tell you've worked hard, but there's something more here, something that makes your music unforgettable. I would like to mentor you if you're willing. With guidance, you could take your playing to levels you haven't yet imagined." The girl felt a mixture of awe and nervousness. A mentor could help her grow, but it also meant stepping further into the unknown. Still, she nodded, feeling excitement bubble inside her. This was an opportunity she could not ignore. Over the following weeks, she began lessons with the mentor. Each session was both challenging and inspiring. She learned to refine her technique, to pay attention to subtle details in phrasing, tempo, and dynamics. More importantly, she learned to trust herself, to play with emotion and authenticity rather than simply trying to hit every note perfectly. Her mentor encouraged her to experiment, to explore different styles, and to find her own voice. Slowly, she realized that music was not just about playing what was written on the page. It was about telling a story that was uniquely hers. Word of her talent began to spread. Teachers, students, and community members who had heard about her performance shared her story with others. She received invitations to perform at local events, school functions, and even small community gatherings. Each opportunity brought new nerves, new challenges, and new excitement. She learned to manage the pressure, relying on her preparation and the connection she felt with the piano to carry her through. With every performance, she grew more confident, more expressive, and more in tune with the power of her music. Her parents watched with pride and amazement. They had always known she had talent, but seeing her recognized by others, receiving mentorship, and performing beyond the walls of school filled them with joy. They reminded her gently that while talent was a gift, persistence, dedication, and courage were just as important. She carried those lessons with her, practicing daily, preparing for performances, and continuing to grow not just as a musician, but as a person capable of handling both success and challenge. The girl also began to notice subtle changes in herself. She felt more confident walking into crowded rooms, more comfortable speaking with people who had once intimidated her. The music had given her a voice beyond words, a way to communicate feelings and ideas with honesty and power. She realized that the courage she had found on the stage of her school auditorium had stayed with her, helping her navigate not just performances but life itself. One afternoon, after a local performance, she was approached by a small group of students who had never spoken to her before. "We heard you play at the recital," one of them said, eyes wide with admiration. "It was amazing. How do you make it sound so real?" She smiled, choosing her words carefully. "I just try to feel it," she said softly. "The music tells its own story. I just let it speak." They nodded, as if understanding more than she could explain, and left with expressions of awe and inspiration. Through all this attention, she remained humble. She understood that her talent was not about showing off or seeking praise. It was about connection, expression, and growth. She spent hours alone at the piano, exploring new pieces, challenging herself, and refining her skills. Each practice session was a conversation with herself, a chance to improve and to discover new ways to tell her story through music. She knew that true mastery was not about recognition, but about dedication, perseverance, and love for the craft. As her reputation grew, so did her opportunities. Invitations arrived for larger performances, some in front of more experienced audiences, some at small festivals. Each performance brought a new level of challenge and excitement. She learned to manage her nerves, channeling them into energy that enhanced her playing. She discovered that the more she gave herself to the music, the more it gave back in return: confidence, recognition, and a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. With each step forward, she remembered the moments of doubt and ridicule she had faced at the beginning of her journey. They had shaped her, strengthened her, and given her perspective. She understood that success was not just about talent or opportunity, but about resilience and courage. The girl who had once been mocked for her appearance and quiet nature had now become someone who inspired others, not just with her music, but with her determination to pursue her dreams despite fear and doubt. Her mentor continued to guide her, pushing her to explore more challenging pieces, to perform in different styles, and to express deeper emotion in her music. Through this guidance, she discovered a level of artistry she had never imagined possible. She learned that music was not just about playing notes accurately, but about storytelling, emotion, and the ability to touch the hearts of listeners. Each lesson deepened her understanding and strengthened her ability to connect with others through her art. As the months passed, the girl began to dream even bigger. She envisioned performing on larger stages, sharing her music with audiences far beyond her school or community. She imagined the impact she could have if she continued to practice, grow, and take risks. The journey she had begun in the girl had come a long way since the day she first walked timidly onto the school stage, unsure and nervous. Every performance, every hour of practice, every small step of courage had led her here. She had learned to trust herself, to play with emotion and authenticity, and to let the music speak in ways words could never match. But now she was about to face a stage unlike any she had encountered before, a regional music competition that could open doors she had only dreamed of. The day of the competition arrived with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She had prepared for weeks, practicing every piece with care, refining every detail, and imagining herself performing in front of the audience. Her parents were supportive, offering gentle encouragement and quiet reassurance. Her mentor had guided her through the last stages of preparation, reminding her to play with feeling, to connect with the music, and to let the audience hear her story. As she stepped into the auditorium, she felt the weight of the moment. The stage was larger than any she had seen, with bright lights and rows of seats stretching far into the distance. The audience included students, parents, teachers, and judges, all waiting expectantly. She could feel the energy in the room, a mix of excitement and anticipation, but she did not let it overwhelm her. Instead, she took a deep breath, feeling the familiar connection between herself and the piano. This was her moment, a culmination of all the effort, courage, and perseverance she had shown so far. She approached the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys as she prepared to begin. The room grew quiet, all eyes on her. For a moment, memories of the past flashed through her mind, the whispers, the mockery, the doubt. But she let them pass. They were part of her journey, not obstacles she had to fear anymore. She had faced them, learned from them, and transformed them into strength. With a calm heart and focused mind, she began to play. The first notes flowed gently, filling the room with a melody that was soft but full of life. She felt the familiar thrill, the quiet excitement that came from expressing herself fully. Her fingers moved with precision, yet each note carried emotion, telling a story of hope, resilience, and courage. She could see subtle reactions in the audience, leaning forward, closing eyes, holding breaths, and it fueled her confidence. She realized that her music could reach people, touch hearts, and inspire them even without words. As she progressed into the more complex parts of the piece, her confidence grew. The fast arpeggios and intricate chords, once intimidating, now felt natural. She let the music flow through her, letting every emotion she had felt in her journey come alive in each note. Joy, fear, determination, and hope, all of it mixed seamlessly into the performance. She no longer played for approval or recognition. She played for herself and for the story she wanted to share. The audience could feel that sincerity, and it made her music even more powerful. The judges watched intently, their eyes following her hands across the keys. They were experts familiar with technical skill, but they could also sense the depth of feeling in her playing. Some exchanged impressed glances, clearly moved by the emotion she conveyed. The girl, unaware of their silent judgment, focused solely on the piano. She felt a sense of liberation in that focus. This was her world, and she was free to express herself without fear. When the piece reached its emotional peak, her fingers moved faster, yet every note remained clear, precise, and full of meaning. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience along. She felt a connection with every person in the room, as if the piano had become a bridge between her heart and theirs. Even the competitors waiting backstage for their turn were captivated by her performance. The girl realized in that moment that music was more than sound. It was a force that could inspire, console, and connect people across any barrier. As she played the final notes, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Every ounce of fear, every moment of doubt, every night spent practicing alone had brought her to this point. The last chord lingered in the air, resonating with power and emotion. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, as if holding its breath, savoring the beauty of the music. Then slowly applause began, soft at first, then growing louder and stronger, filling the entire auditorium. The girl smiled, a shy but proud smile, and stood, bowing gently to the audience. The judges whispered among themselves, clearly impressed. Some students and parents gave standing ovations, and a few teachers had tears in their eyes. She had achieved something extraordinary, not just playing a piece flawlessly, but sharing a story through music that resonated deeply with everyone present. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for her parents, for her mentor, for the long nights of practice, and even for the early days of doubt and mockery that had forced her to persevere. After the performance, the girl was approached by several people who wanted to congratulate her. Some were competitors, acknowledging her talent with respectful smiles. Others were audience members, sharing how moved they had been by her playing. The girl listened, nodded, and smiled, feeling a quiet happiness. She realized that this recognition, though wonderful, was secondary. What mattered most was the courage she had discovered within herself, the ability to express her deepest emotions, and the power of her music to connect with others. The announcement of the winners came later, and the girl could hardly contain her nerves. When her name was called as the first-place winner, she felt a wave of shock and joy. She had dreamed of recognition, of being seen, but this moment was more than she had imagined. She walked to the stage, bowing deeply as the audience applauded and cheered. Her parents and mentor were there, their faces shining with pride and joy. The girl felt a rush of emotion, but she also felt calm. She had faced every fear, taken every risk, and now she was standing in the light of her own courage. After the ceremony, she had a quiet moment backstage. She sat at the piano, letting her fingers glide over the keys, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the mocking students, the whispers, and the doubts. She realized that none of it had broken her. Instead, it had made her stronger. Every challenge had been a step, every small victory a foundation for the next. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. It was persistence, courage, and the willingness to take risks that shaped success. Her mentor approached, smiling warmly. "You have an incredible gift," they said. "But more importantly, you have the courage and heart to use it in ways that inspire others. Keep growing, keep learning, and keep sharing your music. You have the potential to go far, and this is only the beginning." The girl nodded, understanding the truth of these words. Recognition was wonderful, but the real reward was in the growth, the courage, and the connection she had created through her music. In the weeks that followed, she continued to perform at more events, each one bringing new challenges and new opportunities. Invitations came from other cities, and she even began to receive interest from music schools and organizations that could help her take her talent to a professional level. With each performance, she grew more confident, more expressive, and more certain of her path. She realized that the stage, the piano, and the music were not just parts of her life. They were her voice, her purpose, and her way of connecting with the world. Through it all, she remained humble and thoughtful. She remembered the days when she had been laughed at, the moments of self-doubt, and the quiet nights of practice alone. Those experiences had shaped her character, teaching her resilience, patience, and determination. She had learned to face fear, embrace challenges, and trust in her own abilities. And now, as she shared her music with larger audiences, She knew that the courage she had discovered within herself was a gift that would last a lifetime. One evening, after a particularly moving performance, a student approached her backstage. "I used to laugh at you in school," they admitted quietly, eyes downcast. "I didn't know. I didn't see your talent." "I'm sorry." The girl smiled softly, placing a hand on theirs. "It's okay," she said gently. "Sometimes we don't see what's inside others until they have a chance to show it. What matters is that you see it now." The student nodded, visibly relieved and inspired. The girl realized that her journey was not just about her success, but also about the way it could impact others, changing perceptions and inspiring courage. As months turned into years, her journey continued to grow. She performed in larger venues, received awards, and even began teaching others who were just starting to learn the piano. She shared not only her skill but also her story, the story of fear, mockery, perseverance, and triumph. She encouraged her students to trust themselves, to work hard, and to never let doubt or ridicule define them. In this way, her influence extended beyond the notes she played, touching lives and inspiring confidence in others. Looking back on her journey, she realized that the true magic had never been in the applause or recognition. It had been in the courage she had discovered, the connection she had forged through her music, and the strength she had built through perseverance. She had learned that challenges could become opportunities, that fear could become fuel, and that even a quiet, overlooked person could leave a lasting impact on the world. The girl often returned to the small auditorium where her journey had begun. She would sit at the piano,